Hello and welcome to Season 5 of the Soundstage Audiophile Podcast. For the past few years, we've been digging deep into the history of hi-fi, as well as how geopolitics and socioeconomic forces are shaping its present realities. This season, we'll also start to look at hi-fi and audiophilia with an eye toward the future. What's this hobby going to look like as demographics shift? What can we do to bring in new enthusiasts? How will the gear and the hobby itself evolve in the coming decades? To discuss the possibilities, here's host Jorden Guth and this week's guest.
Hello and welcome to the Soundstage Audiophile Podcast. Today we have Paul Hales, the CEO and product designer of Pro Audio Technology, as well as Theory Audio Design, joining us once again. Paul, for those of you who don't know, has a really extensive history in the audio industry, both in consumer audio as well as in the professional audio spaces. So think sound reinforcement, think commercial spaces and larger, kind of making things everywhere you hear music or sound better. So thanks for joining us once again, Paul. Great to have you back.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here. I always have fun when we do these things. So glad to do it.
Love it. And this season, we're kind of talking about the future of hi-fi and kind of where we see hi-fi going. We've had you on last season to talk a little bit about where things are made and why. And I think you had not only a lot of good insights, but a lot of strong opinions that are, for me, very interesting to hear. I love hearing kind of the contrarian view and sometimes the mainstream view and kind of absorbing all of them and kind of getting to my own opinion from there. So this should be a good talk.
Yeah, I mean, I've never been accused of being a wilting flower or whatever. I tend to speak out a little bit. So, but hopefully, when I speak out or take a contrarian approach, I'm doing it from a fact basis, right? I'm speaking the truth that might shine some light on some misconceptions. That's my desire, anyway. It might come off as opinion, but it should be based in fact, right?
Yeah. And I think there's a lot there and there's a lot to unpack. And you do have a lot of experience in these different kind of fields. So maybe we'll go back to what instigated this conversation. And there's two bits. There's the first bit, which you had a speaker that was out in the wide open, some 200 feet away, that you recorded and posted on social media. This was a new speaker for you guys that was playing quite well and quite good for that space. So that was impressive. And then there was also this comment that you left after we did one of our latest episodes on the JL speakers and the audio technologies that they're using for room correction.
Mm-hmm.
So where should we pick up? Where should we start?
Well, it's up to you guys, but I've had strong opinions about so-called room correction for a long time, a couple decades actually, right? And I've been speaking out about it for that entire time. Nobody listens to me, but I just I don't have a problem with the idea of system-wide DSP or processing or equalization. I think what gets me going a little bit is the misconceptions and how this stuff has been marketed to the customers, because it's a little misleading. It doesn't really do what I think the consumers think it does, right? And so I just want people to have an understanding of what it does do, how it does it, why it does it, and how that might result in better performance or sometimes worse performance, right? There are trade-offs. And for every adjustment that those schemes make, there's always another side of that coin. So you if you're trying to improve one aspect of the sound reproduction, you're always doing it at an expense of something else. And so I'm not sure that that's well understood. So if we can, in this conversation, shine a little bit of light on that stuff, then so much the better, right?
I love it. And let's kind of, maybe we'll set the stage by defining terms a little bit here. So
Okay.
DSP, digital signal processing, it's something that I don't know of a manufacturer that makes electronics or active speaker systems today that doesn't use some form of DSP to do some amount of correction of the speakers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, room correction, and maybe this is where there is a lot of even misunderstanding there. Room correction is the application of DSP specifically for the environment in which the speakers are being used in.
That's right.
So let's just start with like the DSP. In your own speakers, in your own systems, what do you guys use DSP for?
Okay, good question. So look, we embraced DSP. I embraced DSP in 2001. Okay, so 25 years ago, quite literally. And so shortly after I joined QSE and we started to develop products for commercial and professional applications, we showed a speaker at the NSCA show in Orlando. There isn't an NSCA show anymore, but it kind of morphed into Infocom, and it was a double 12-inch horn-loaded PA kind of speaker. And I was running it with a wideband fur filter. So I wasn't aware prior to 2001 anybody that had ever applied a FIR filter in that application before. And we took these what looked like bad PA boxes to the show, and it made this really hi-fi sound. And I still get people to this day going, "I remember when you showed that speaker at NSCA." And so I have been pro DSP because I think I might come off as anti DSP. I'm absolutely not. I love DSP. I'm anti room centric equalization because taking measurements in rooms is problematic and misleading, right? And so DSP itself, we've had it in the product from the very beginning. When we launched Pro Audio Technology in 2004, the first couple years, about 18 months to 24 months, we sold the loudspeakers with QSC amplifiers and their DSP processors. They had a little a wart that stuck onto the back of the amp that provided DSP at the input to the amplifier. And then in 2006, we launched our own first proprietary amplifiers, and they were always based on DSP. So we leveraged the DSP primarily to do what the passive crossover would do in a regular speaker, right? So rather than have a full range signal that goes into the back of the loudspeaker, and then you use passive components to divide it up and do some frequency contouring. We do it all in the amp ahead of it, and everything is biamplified, triamplified. And in doing that, we have much, much higher resolution and much, much higher control over the ultimate final acoustic response of the loudspeaker, right? And so I got spoiled by DSP in the early 2000s. I kind of I complain and whine about a few things in audio. Passive crossovers is one of them. Dome tweeters is one of them, and I'll pick on those things because I just don't think they're very good at what they do. Right. So the idea of DSP, I love it. The idea of applying DSP to an audio system to somehow negate the acoustic environment you're in is where you start to lose me, right? It can't do that. It can't do a lot of things it's purported to do. And in that very long comment I left, I mean, Doug stepped into it. He shouldn't have said, "Hey, I want to leave a comment about room correction." And I was like, "Oh my God, yes!"
The invitation I've always wanted.
Yes, I've been waiting for you to ask that question. And so I left, and that just flowed out. I mean, it was a really long comment, probably one of the longest comments ever left on YouTube. But look, I fired off, I think, 4 or 5 different things that DSP can't do, right? And I think if we address those, people will start to understand some of the limitations of those things. And look, I have a problem with the name room correction because it's a misnomer. It doesn't correct the room. The room doesn't change. It doesn't have anything to do with the room. It's really just a high resolution tone control. And we can talk about what the DSP can and can't do to the signal, and then decide, okay, what are those changes in the signal? How are those going to manifest in this so-called correction scheme? Like, what is really being corrected and what is changing, what isn't? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then we can go from there because I think that all the guys from Harman, I think if you talk to Sean Olive and talk to Floyd Toole and you talk to Todd Welty, they're going to give you the same answer I'll give you, which is if you have well-engineered loudspeakers, in situ kind of EQ is not what you want to do. You're going to make things worse. If you have shortcomings in your loudspeakers, then there's a chance you're going to improve some things. but they would say the same thing, believe it or not. And we can you dive a little deeper in that if you want to.
So I guess there is a question here from like my thinking about this, which is we're kind of talking about this idea that room correction is not going to change your room. It's not going to change your environment. But do you see the benefit of room correction in giving somebody that doesn't have kind of like a sole purpose space the ability to maybe not have to do the specific room treatments or move furniture away or do bass traps or do all these other things in the physical space that they can do essentially through kind of a that DSP to give them a little bit better sound, or and you kind of already mentioned this, maybe I'll say different instead of better. So give them a different sound which is closer to what they would expect given the limitations of not their speaker but the room itself.
Yeah. So, great question. So, look, lest I come off just anti, tone controls. I'm not. Anybody can listen to whatever kind of sound they prefer, right? And what might be perceived as more enjoyable. I'll just relay a recent story. I got into a new car a couple months ago. It had the upgraded hi-fi system. I'm not going to tell you the brand. It was a very expensive system. I listened to it and it sounded terrible. Like it didn't have any fullness or dynamics or richness to the sound at all. And I diddled the knobs and changed it and got it to sound pretty pleasing.
Mm.
So in that context, it can be hugely valuable. But again, we're starting with an awful loudspeaker, and in this case, it was just kind of an awful system. From the factory, it wasn't set up well. And so I was able to make it much better. Okay. I think though, if you started with a really good pair of loudspeakers, let's just use Revel as a brand. Dennis and Brent, they refer to Revel a lot on their show, and they're well engineered. They follow the stuff that Floyd has learned over the last 60 years. And in a nutshell, what we if I was to summarize what he concluded is if you design a loudspeaker, which is an acoustic transducer, right? So it takes an electrical signal and it converts it into the acoustic equivalent of it, right? It's electromechanical transducer. If you design it in a certain way, you're going to get the best performance possible out of it. And to boil it down into its simplest description would be flat on-axis response and well-behaved, smooth off-axis behavior. And then you can kind of put that into almost any environment. Now, let's take the extreme environments out, right? If somebody has a purely reverberant room, like hard surfaces on all six,
Marble walls and ceiling and floor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, if it's large, my approach is going to give you the best sound every time. If it's small, like I used to go to a gym in the 90s with my buddies at lunch that we worked with. We'd go over to the gym and the shower was tile on all the surfaces, and it was pretty small space. It was probably 14 feet by 10 feet by 7 feet or something. You could barely even talk. Like you couldn't even carry on a conversation because the surfaces were so close to you. Your no EQ is ever going to stop that from happening, right? The reverberation is going to happen, right? And so I'll probably share three things that I shared with the folks at QSC back in the early 2000s. They all thought I was from Mars. One of the things I said is I was like, look, I can't stop your reflections from happening, right? And DSP can't. Room correction can't stop the reflections from happening. What I can do as a loudspeaker designer is make them sound good, right? And so that's what we try to do. Is the reflections are going to happen. People think there's like some magic where you can like stop the reverberation from happening. You can't. And so when you scale up to sound reinforcement, we're entering sound reinforcement now. You see line arrays at almost every live show now, because the idea is they're stopping reflections. They're not stopping reflections. They're just making them very band limited. They're just limiting the reflected energy in the venue to the low frequencies and the lower mid-range frequencies, because you can't control those, right? So, kind of going back to what I was saying is, if you've got a huge reverberant space like our warehouse, did you get the demo?
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So we have pendants hanging in the middle of a huge warehouse, and we have one little ceiling speaker in the wall and one in-wall speaker, and we make a good sound in a 60-foot by 50-foot by 28-foot reverberant room, because the power response of the speaker and the direct response are both flat and neutral, and the timbre is coherent, right? What we know is that human beings prefer it when the reverberant energy and the direct sound are in harmony with one another, right? They have the same quality of sound, right? And so that's why those speakers work in that giant reverberant space, is all the reflected energy comes back to your ears, can't stop it from coming. So it comes back to your ears, and it has the same timbral qualities as the direct sound that goes directly to your ears, and it all blends together. And so what you experience is, you experience a very large reverberant space. You're going to hear the size of the space, right?
Yeah.
But all of that sound coming back to you sounds good also. And so you go out there, and you can enjoy listening to music in there because the power response is also good. Now, if we tried aggressively to point the sound directly to the humans that are standing on the ground, and then now all the reverberant energy is just the low frequencies, and it comes back to you like this, now it's not going to sound as good.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's where the room correction things, in my view, fall apart. Is if you have a well-engineered speaker, um, those will even sound good in bad rooms, and we prove it at CEDIA every year. So,
And we're gonna have we have Dennis from behind the curtain, Mr.
Hi.
Audio Unleashed, is gonna jump in and ask a question.
My name was invoked here. I'm like Beetlejuice. I have to show up. And by the way, sorry about the quality of my voice right now. I'm just kind of starting to get my voice back. Interestingly, when we were having a conversation about this episode beforehand, we sort of set up the possibility of like a debate between me and Paul, because I'm known as the room correction guy. Like, people have literally called, "Oh, you're the room correction guy," and so. But here's what's interesting. I don't disagree with a single word of what you've said so far, Paul. The only thing that I disagree with is, I don't think you're arguing against room correction. I think you're arguing against bad room correction. And I think you're arguing against invalid application of room correction, right? Like, with regard to directivity, like, you can't really do anything with room correction on a speaker that's got bad directivity. I mean, it's just, but even that, I think for the most part, as big an advocate of room correction as I am, I think the number one advice that I give most people, and the one thing I'm known for, is just like, if you're going to do room correction in your room, find the transition frequency of your room, go 2 octaves above that. Don't apply room correction above that point. Like, you could spend a lot of time and a lot of energy, and the best you're going to be able to do is sort of get like your room correction to be neutral and transparent above that point. So just don't even do it, right? Just set a max filter frequency of, like, in this room it's 800 hertz. In another room in my house it's like 875 or something like that. But what I've found in my experience is, you can argue all day long about why room correction shouldn't work below that point. But in my experience, it just does. It gives you better seat-to-seat consistency of the bass. It gives you better note-to-note consistency of the bass, if well done. And if you know what you're doing, which I think a lot of people don't. I don't think any system that just has you set a microphone in a spot and take your measurements, it's probably going to create more problems than it solves. But like Dirac, which I'm a big proponent of, you could take, like, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's like 12 measurements, 12, 14 measurements or something like that. And you can look at each of those individual measurements and go, ooh, something is wrong. Like, that one measurement in that spot leads me to believe that I need to start rearranging my speakers or rearranging my room. But once you get to the point to where all of those measurements are kind of like, what? They're sort of looking similar, then you can start to use a combination of phase manipulation and, FIR filters and EQ to give you better note to note and seat to seat consistency below the Ray region, way below the Ray region.
At the expense of impact, Dennis, at the expense of impact. And we can dive into that. Keep going.
Okay, well, talk about that then. It's like, because maybe I don't know what I'm listening for. Maybe I haven't heard that. I haven't really well done Dirac, judiciously applied and limited in its scope. I haven't heard it affect the impact of the bass. But what am I missing? What should I be listening for?
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think you said I'm anti, using room correction poorly or not as intended, or all that stuff. Really, what I'm anti is bad loudspeakers, right?
Me too.
So your problem isn't your room most of the time. Your problem is your speakers aren't good enough. Okay. So, we go at CEDIA, when we do these trade shows, we get a booth on the show floor. And then we always get an audio demo room, which is typically a ballroom inside a convention center. And you kind of are given what the best, you go for the best room you can get. And CEDIA just started doing demo rooms. They used to put little sound rooms on the show floor, and they're kind of small and not very good. And they started to open up the ballrooms a few years ago, I think 3 years ago. And it was new to them, and they didn't realize it, but they made all the demo rooms the square rooms, right? So our demo room that we get is 30 feet by 30 feet by 15 feet. Okay. It's the second worst possible shape you could have for audio. The only thing worse would be if it was 30 by 30 by 30, right? And we go in there and we make great sound every year. And every year the journalists come out of there and they go, well, which room correction? You have a storm. Are you using Dirac, or what room correction you were doing? I was like, we weren't using any room correction. And they're like, what? What are you talking about? And I was like, no, that's the sound you get from the loudspeakers, even in a bad room. So a lot of times, again, what you're blaming on the room is really the speakers aren't good enough. And we make great sound in a bad room, and we put our money where our mouth is, and we made huge impact. So there's a lot of things you said I want to address, but let's key in on that seat to seat variation thing, right? Because and this is probably one of the only ways at all that I sort of differ from the thinking of Floyd Toole. Right. And so last year, Doug Snyder very graciously invited me to attend a little event. Yeah. And my family called it speaker camp. Right. So a bunch of speaker nerds, mostly from Canada, but I think I might have been the only guy from US. And then there's another speaker designer from Europe. But we got together to kind of celebrate the fact that Floyd had moved back to Canada. And I spent some time with him, and I actually wanted to, and Sean Olive was there, and I wanted to address this with him. But when you EQ for seat to seat variation and or standing waves, okay, you do it at the expense of impact, and here's how. Here's why. Here's how that works, right? So let's zoom way out, okay? And this will be where having a dialogue back and forth might be enlightening for everyone. What are these systems doing fundamentally, like at a very high level, right? The sound is measured inside the room, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the goal of the system, and you can correct me if I'm off here, but is to alter the sound coming out of the system in some way to compensate for the effect of the room on that sound. So certain frequencies are emphasized, and other frequencies are maybe canceled or de-emphasized, right?
Also phase shifted when you're talking about Dirac. Yeah.
Well, there could be phase, but fundamentally, the standing waves create, extra, the resonance of the room reinforce certain frequencies, and they cancel certain other frequencies. And rather than using the term frequencies, let's just call them notes, right? Musical notes, right? Some notes are emphasized, some notes are kind of canceled or diminished. And the room correction scheme seeks to stop that emphasis from happening, right? And the diminished notes from happening, right? Mm-hmm. Do you guys agree that that's kind of what fundamentally that's what it's doing?
Ideally, yeah. I mean, basically taking through some combination of FIR filters, phase correction, delay, what have you, and also EQ. Yeah, making it such that you're not getting those crazy over accentuated bass notes and crazy under accentuated bass notes.
From the standing waves, right? The room
right.
resonance
Yes.
is the best way to think of it, right? And then there's reflected energy and all that stuff, right? So some notes are emphasized and some notes are de-emphasized by the nature of the reflected energy in the room, right? So now let's forget about speakers for a second. Forget about audio. Forget you guys are audio professionals, and I'll try to forget that I'm one. And let's just talk about a piano, right? So if you rolled a piano into that same room and you had measured the room resonances and you said, okay, these piano notes are going to be emphasized by the room, and these other piano notes are going to be de-emphasized by the room's resonances. And then you set about to attenuate the output of the notes that are going to get emphasized, and you do it such a way so that the notes that get de-emphasized, and you ended up with a flat piano response in the room, right? In other words, if you said, okay, these notes on the keyboard are going to be emphasized, so we're going to have to damp those down a little bit so they're not as loud.
Okay.
And then you said these other ones are going to be not loud enough, so let's just pull all the level down and neutralize it across that middle axis. And you did all those adjustments to the piano, and then you asked somebody to play a couple chords. Just a low left hand chord and a right hand chord simultaneously. Do you think that piano would sound better and more natural in that room?
Hell no. But then again, a piano doesn't put energy into the room the same way as a loudspeaker does.
So it absolutely does. It absolutely does. The sound sources in the room are all have every sound emitting phenomenon, whether it's a human being, an animal, you drop a book on the ground, whatever it is, there's a frequency dependent directivity associated with that, right? And the way to simplify, make it simple for the listeners to think about is the larger the thing, the sort of more directional it's going to be, and the smaller the emitting sound, the more sort of omnidirectional it's going to be. So a big stand-up bass like the one that Brent plays, it's going to have some directionality to it because it's quite large, right? A violin, same shape, only littler, it's going to be more directional only at the highest frequencies and stuff. So the sound comes out and it is frequency dependent directivity, but if you look at instruments like the orchestral instruments, for example, the frequency-dependent directivity of those instruments, most of them are omnidirectional over most of the band. There is some directionality at the highest frequencies, but they tend to be wide dispersion things, right? Human beings, for example, our voices are roughly directivity of 3 dB, like 180 degrees, right? So the speaker, Jorden, that you were, I think, referencing when you opened this conversation that we demonstrated outside, what makes that thing unique is it has a big elaborate horn on it that has 180 degree horizontal dispersion and 60 degree vertical. And it is a very well controlled 60 degrees, and it is very wide. Okay, you can go to the side of that speaker and you still hear a full bandwidth, really good sound. So the idea is you can roll one to the corner of one stage, that one corner of the stage, roll another one to the corner of the other stage, do a whole outdoor festival, cover the entire lawn with just two speakers, right?
As opposed to getting a line array set up and
multiple, you got to have side fills and front fills and all the fills. You don't need any fills. This sprays the whole thing, right? And so at ISE, we presented this, and I offered 3 reasons. It was like, why would anyone ever want 180-degree horizontal coverage? That's the opposite of what the industry's been teaching people.
Yeah,
Is you
go
need,
directivity.
yeah,
Very focused.
laser beam sound, right? Just laser it to your listeners' heads, like that it works, right? And so this is the opposite. This is like spray it wide. And so I offered 3 reasons why you would want that. And then a very smart guy in one of the demos on like the second day of the show came up. He goes, you know what the 4th reason is? He goes, what? He goes, that human voice, which is what we hear the most, has a directivity of about 180 degrees. So when we're having a conversation in a room, we are used to the room lighting up that voice coming back to you as the reverberant sound with that wider dispersion. So this is opening several new topics that I want to throw out before I forget them. One of them is, if you try to adjust your hi-fi to get on top of or control physical reality, Mother Nature, acoustic, the physics of acoustics, you're going to do so at the expense of naturalness. It's not going to sound natural, because what we're used to hearing is the room that I'm in, giving me reverberant sound back based on the dispersion of the piano or my voice or whatever. And if you make your speaker unnaturally narrow, and this room now doesn't reinforce the voice in the way we're used to experiencing it. I'm 60 years old. For 60 years, I've been hearing people talk in rooms, and then your speaker laser beams the voice to your ears. It is not going to sound right in that room. Human beings can, unlike microphones, okay? So there's so many sources of error in these room correction schemes. One is that the microphone doesn't pick up the sound field the way human beings do, right? It can't distinguish between the reflected sound or the reverberant sound and the direct sound. So the direct sound comes directly from the speakers into the microphone. It gets reflected off all the surfaces, comes also into the microphone. The microphone just adds it all together and gives you a total, right? So the curve you're seeing on the screen is just the total of all the sound, all the direct field and the reverberant field. Human beings do separate those out. We key in on the direct sound, identify it, and then we also hear the reverberant energy, but we hear it and we're able to distinguish between them. Okay? So, and the microphone can't. So when the reverberant sound is not natural, if Dennis talked to me in this room live, unleashed. How did I do? Better than Brent, right?
Good, man. I think you can replace me. Yeah.
No, I can't replace you. But if the speaker laser beamed Dennis's voice at me and I didn't hear what I would normally experience from Dennis in the same room, it isn't going to sound natural, because it isn't natural.
It's going to sound like cupped hands distortion.
Kind of, yeah. The principle is the same, right?
Yeah.
And so here is where the room correction schemes fall on their face. They equalize the direct field and the reverberant field the same. Okay, you can't send some EQ processing to the direct sound and then say, but I want different processing for the reflected sound, right? Yeah. Just like you can't send different EQ to different seats in the room, right? We go to these shows, we have 50 chairs. I want this EQ to go to that chair, and this EQ to go to this other chair, and this other processing to go to this chair over here, right? And so because you can't EQ both, you sacrifice one for the other. You can't correct both, right? So the problem is the microphone picks up the total sound, and it's dominated by the reverberant sound. And so the EQ scheme tries to fix that measured sound. And it EQs the direct sound based on that measurement, and the direct sound hasn't encountered the room yet. There is no room in the direct sound, right? Mm-hmm. The sound that comes directly to your ears hasn't been affected by the room. The room doesn't exist. So you're saying, I'm going to fix this for the room sound, and you change the sound that isn't affected by the room the same amount, and that's where the error occurs. And that's why you lose impact, Dennis. Here's what happens. It's the same thing. We played a demo at Cedia last year. It was a giant bass drum, and a guy whacks this bass drum, and it just goes boom. And we had these big double 21-inch subs there, and it just punched you in the chest and knocked you back. And people were like, everybody was like, "Whoa!" It was so visceral. Not the vibration of the environment, the acoustic impact, the sound wave, the concussive wave from that reproducing that drum hitting you physically, right? So if we had measured that room and identified, oh my God, there's a gigantic standing wave at 62 and 124 and 228, whatever it is, and we started to pull energy out of those frequencies, the room resonances, right? And you pull a bunch of 60 hertz out because the room is accentuating them. You would just pull 60 hertz out of that bass drum, and that bass drum is too short in time for the standing waves to occur. The standing waves don't happen because it's in and out, right? So if you look at the energy from like a kick drum, so I'm a drummer, so I love kick drum and I love drums. The bulk of the impact of the mallet hitting the bass drum is about 20 milliseconds in duration. Okay. And the whole bass drum, unless it's really damped, if it's kind of an undamped head, it will last about 100 milliseconds, but 90% of the energy happens in 20 milliseconds. So there's no time for standing waves to develop. The 20 milliseconds translates to about one cycle at 60 hertz, right? One sine wave. So there's no standing wave that occurs. So then if I pulled 60 hertz out based on the measured in-room response, I've now just pulled 60 hertz out of that bass drum, and guess what? The impact goes away. Sorry, that's just the reality of what happens.
Okay, so let me put it this way to you. Let me ask you this.
And then I got some questions after.
Again, keeping in mind that I'm a proponent of most of your room correction should be applied below the ray region of the room. There's also the reality that I'm dealing with two 12-inch ported subs in my room that cost less than a couple of thousand. I don't have gigantic 22-inch subs. Like I don't have $10,000 to spend on a subwoofer or what have you. So I think in a lot of cases, we have to deal with the reality of, do I wish I didn't have to use room correction in this room? Yeah, but I can get better note-to-note consistency, better seat-to-seat consistency in my room using Dirac, and I can hear you can turn it on and turn it off, and with it on, it's less distracting, and with it off, it's more distracting. And so, yes, by throwing a staggering amount of money into transducers in this room, I could fix the problems that I'm fixing with Dirac, but I don't have that staggering amount of money to spend on it. So what would be your advice to someone like me who's using Dirac in a very controlled, very deliberate way, in many cases to make annoyances and distractions go away given the limitations of the budgets of the gear that I'm running in my room? Like, what is the alternative? If I turn Dirac off, it starts to become distracting. And I'm not hearing the loss of impact that you're describing. And it may just be because no subwoofer that I could afford is capable of producing the level of impact that you're talking about. But I guess the question that I would put back to you then is like, given my system, given the constraints that I think most people have, I'm finding that room correction gives me less distracting, more enjoyable sound. What is the alternative to spending just staggering amounts of money? And do you think in my situation, in my room, my application of Dirac is valid?
Yeah. So look, everything you just said is perfect to talk about. So yeah, what you're telling me is that with no EQ at all, you get distracting resonances that bother you and you can't enjoy the content, right?
Well, I can still enjoy it. It's just I enjoy it more if those distractions go away.
And that's a perfectly valid application of it, right? Again, I'm coming from a very absolute standpoint. I'm going to point out what it can and can't do and what the trade-offs are when you do something. Like if you pull 60 hertz out for the sustained notes, you're going to pull it out of the kick drum. Just know you're doing that, right?
Yeah.
And that's just a fact, right?
Yeah.
So what I could tell you, what the recipe for the best possible performance in any room that you're going to have is to get the very best loudspeakers you can afford and try to make the room acoustic neutral, right? And if you're building a house, then you have the luxury of picking the room dimensional ratios, so you can make sure you don't have whole multiples, so you don't want a 30 by 30 by 15 foot room.
Yeah.
So, and then you just want a neutral acoustic. And what I mean by neutral is, if you want to geek out and get technical, I'm talking about a RT60 of like 0.4 to even maybe 0.5. That's hard to intuitively understand, but the way Floyd says it, and in my experience, this is true. It's about like the normal North American living room, right? So you have a rug maybe you have hardwood floors, but you have a large rug, you have a big overstuffed couch, you have some bookshelves and some things on the walls that create diffusion, and that's a pretty good start. And then you would be better served, in my opinion, to buy better loudspeakers, because then you place them intelligently, right? So I think where I kind of diverge from the Harman guys is the seat to seat variation. When you go after that, you do it at the expense of impact, and I think I could demonstrate that to you, even if with your semi-affordable 12-inch subs. I think you could hear it. And let me just share a story, and you guys can look at this. But one of your colleagues that has another audio website, YouTube channel kind of thing, who tends to be into bass. He's a bass head guy, right? And so he talks a lot about infrasonic, and he covers subwoofers and stuff. And so he came into our demo room right at the very end of CDA last year, and the show had already closed, and he came in and he sat down near the back of the room. And so I was like, I don't know if I should mention his name or not, but I said, I'll just mention his first name. I said, Todd, you like bass? Let me play something for you. And I played the bass drum. And he's like, oh my God, okay, we need to talk about this. And so he set up his gear and he sat me down and we started talking about it. And he goes, look, I've been at every room at the show. There's a $1.3 million room that had 12 subwoofers and 2 infrasonic subs in it, and none of them got that input. Paul, why? What are you doing? And I was like, they didn't get it because I got it because I didn't EQ the crap out of the signal and I left it alone, right? And I explained why. And you can't correct for the sound that is affected by the room without harming the sound that hasn't been affected by the room yet. All the direct sound and the short duration, low frequency sounds. And he said in the interview, and I encourage you guys to go watch it. It's short; it's just a few minutes long. Is the proof is in the pudding, right? And so I proved that you could get the impact. And so this is making another point that I want people to consider, which is if you start to process the out of the sound, how do the kids say it? What do they say instead of the S word? They ish. I think they say ish.
Ish?
If you start, yes. If you start processing the ish out of the sound, it's going to sound processed. Okay, just at a fundamental level. Again, why? Go back to the piano analogy. If you started messing with the piano's damping on the different strings and the different notes to compensate it for the impact of the room it's in, do you think the piano would sound better?
No.
Then James, mic drop. Like, where's my mic drop?
Hey guys, it is starting to become obvious that this one's running a little long, so why don't we take a break and we'll split this episode into 2. So everybody, if you're enjoying the conversation, come back and join us in 2 weeks for the second half of our discussion with Paul.
That sounds great. Take care and all the best.